Okay, welcome. This video is more for the helping of students who are struggling with their algebra in physics, and it just goes over a few fundamental things that you just need to be wary of. In the previous videos, or in some of the videos, you might have seen me use the algebra around trigonometry, so you've had examples of that, but I'm going to focus more on some of the more basic stuff, just to make sure that you have enough knowledge and you have something to refer back to when looking at the algebra that you're doing. So starting off with the most basic form of algebra, we're just going to look at a standard style of question, which is x, y and z. So where we have an x term, which is equal to a y divided by a z, and we need to find out what one thing is, and we know two of them. So this is pretty much your bread and butter kind of calculation, and actually these rules apply when you have multiple terms on top or below of a fraction as well, and you might want to group them, but we can talk more about that in a later video with more difficult algebra. But for the moment, so say for example we want to find out y and we've got x and z. Well, essentially what we're looking at here in terms of the algebra, so what I would do is I'm just going to tell you, this is what I want to find out. Y is what I want to find out. Now, how do I do this algebra? Well, we have to do the same to both sides of the equal sign. Now, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're going to not need to do this, you're just going to see what needs to happen. So, I'm going to times both sides by z, times both z by z, times that by z. So what we've got here is a situation where if I've divided something by z, and then timesing it by z, that gets rid of those z's. And that ends up with me z times x equals y. And we are pretty much there now because we knew we had y, z and x, so we've now rearranged for y, and that's pretty basic. So what do you do then? Let's start again with x, y and z. So x, y and z there. What do I do if I want to make z the subject? Okay, so you might know how to quickly do this, but it's important to understand the algebra as to why what happens. So I want to find out z, so I'm going to put a little question mark by that. I want to find out z. Well, we need to treat these as fractions, so I'm going to turn both sides into a fraction. So I'll leave that one in red and I'll transfer over to blue. So x over 1 is equal to y over z. And that should be hopefully pretty easy for you to understand because anything divided by 1 is itself. But we're just turning this into fractions because what we can do now is we can flip them, because 1 over x will be equal to z over y. Okay, and if you don't believe me, throw some numbers into these calculations on a calculator and check them out for yourself. But they are equal to the same thing. So at this stage, it's actually similar to what we've just done. We want to find out what z is, so we need to get rid of the y on this side. So what do? Well, we can times both sides by y. So times that by y, times that by y, and as I said before, that gets rid of the y's. So we end up with y times 1 over x is equal to z, well, z on its own, you could say z over 1, but z is fine. How can we simplify this further? Well, this simplifies to y over x is equal to z. Now at this stage we've got everything we needed to do. We've got y and x and we can find z. Now hopefully, if you look right back at the beginning, you can see a quick way of doing this. If it was on top before, it means it was on top, it's going to be on top at the end. So quite simply, some of you will start seeing the quick jump here to it was on top there, so it's on top over here, y over x will equal z. And that is going to be a nice quick jump for you when you're doing these physics problems in class, okay? You should get used to it. That's not to say you don't need to understand this, you do need to be able to understand that mathematics. Okay, so let's go slightly deeper now and look at some other forms. By the way, an XYZ equation, one that you're probably aware of, is speed equals distance over time. Speed equals distance over time is a nice example of that. And you're going to get lots of three-part equations. You're going to get Ohm's law, V equals I times R. These are all ones that you're going to come up with lots of three-part equations that you're going to use over and over and over again. Okay? We're going to introduce some larger part equations later, but the rules still apply. So this next equation is one that you'll do in material physics, and it's one that has a very nice trick to it, and some algebraic examples that we can put together. So Young modulus is something we're going to come across. It's represented by a nice capital E, is equal to stress over strain. So those letters might seem a bit foreign to you, especially if you haven't done this yet, but we can work with it anyway, because I'm going to just throw out some terms. So it's a three-part equation again, but however, these are some words that you might get a bit more familiar with. Sigma over here, which is the stress, which is force over the cross-sectional area, and the strain, which is the extension over the original length. This is all to do with material stretching, but we'll talk more about that later. So we can throw those into an equation. Now that's ugly. Fractions on top of fractions within a fraction, that's horrible. That's horrible algebra, and we need to represent it better. Now the nice thing that you can see here, an algebraic trick, is that when you've got a fraction on top, the lower part of that fraction, and the lower part of that fraction here I'm talking about is this one, it can just be moved to the bottom. A similar rule for the bottom. If you've got a fraction on the bottom, then that can be moved to the top and turned into timeses in both cases. So this equation becomes F times L over A times X. Okay? So just to recap, fraction on top, the bottom part of that fraction can go to the bottom as a times. Bottom part fraction on bottom, the denominator, can go to the top as a times on top. Okay? So that's a nice little trick to remember, one that is very, very, very helpful. Okay? Especially at this stage, and you're going to come across needing to be able to rearrange these fractions for any one of these letters. Okay? Using similar rules to which we've applied before. So that's just some basics of algebra, just to get you started, and we'll cover some more in a later video. Thanks.